Welcome back to the show, everybody, or as always, massive welcome to anyone joining us on Maverick Mind for the very, very, very first time. Lovely to be here with you all, as always. This week, I am joined by choreographer, director, and she's also a somatic practitioner, woman after my own heart, Alexandra Beller. She has spent decades working with the body, first as a professional dancer, touring internationally, later as a really, really highly respected choreographer and teacher, exploring how movement and emotion and meaning are all connected. And what really stayed with me for this conversation is really how much her work is about helping creators or dancers and people watching the performances come back into relationship with themselves too. You know, we talk a lot about creativity and about technique and output and results within the creative space, but Alexandra's work really sits more closely to the question of how we are experiencing what we're doing and the difference between just executing stuff and actually being inside our creative process. So with her, of course, that's dance, you know, doing moves rather than being within the music. But that applies for really everything, I think. There's like doing action on what you're creating or being with the creative process. And when we're with what we're doing, it creates a lot more of an honest, vulnerable expression, right? In this conversation, we explore a lot about the idea that many of us grow up being taught to prioritize external metrics, you know, what something looks like, how it's judged, and whether it succeeds or not, and that reflection upon us as human beings. And in turn, we lose touch with our internal kind of, within coaching terms, we call it locus of control, what something really feels like, whether it resonates and whether something's actually true for us and what we're doing. So we're talking about embodiment, we're talking about slowing down in a culture that currently tells us to push forward and faster, and how creative work often requires balancing two very different modes: the intuitive, instinctive side of making something and the analytical side that shapes it into something meaningful, something I speak about a lot, which I think especially for highly creative people, if you're anything like me, then my brain just absolutely does not work in the analytical and the structural way. I don't know why. We have to intentionally create that around it so that our magic and our ideas actually have direction. So this is one of those conversations that moves so far beyond dance, and it's really about creative energy, about attention, and learning to trust your own internal signals. So I really hope you love this one. I had such the best time, as I'm sure you can imagine, chatting with Alexandra. So let's meet her, shall we? Alexandra Beller, welcome to Maverick Mind. Alexandra, a huge welcome to Maverick Mind. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was thinking about so many things that you do, because I think a lot, as I was saying before we hit record, there's so many that align with the things that I do. But actually, I was just thinking about right before I joined the call, I was thinking about this. I was having a doom scroll the other day, as we all do at some point, and this reel came up that I sparked an idea that I would love to kind of introduce people to you through, because I think it kind of demonstrated a lot of what you do. Being a choreographer, and you've choreographed loads of different things and working with the body and somatics. And this reel was basically a side by side of a dancer or a choreographer, not sure because it's not someone that I follow. And they were demonstrating what it looks like when somebody is just doing the moves, or when somebody is in the movement, or like in the middle of the choreography, like really feeling it. And I thought that was so interesting because it's something that I haven't seen side by side so much before. I mean, I used to dance, so I totally know what it feels like to be in the music, but I would love to know from your perspective, of working with so many dancers and have danced for so long yourself, what you think it takes to be really with what you're doing rather than almost on top of it.
Yeah, such a great portal to talking about embodiment. Um, I I think that from when we're very young in many countries, especially like Western countries, we get conditioned to prioritize outer metrics versus inner metrics. So, I mean, if you even just think about like how our health is handled, children go to the doctor and the doctor, you know, weighs them and measures them and they ask you one or two questions. But if you can imagine if like from when we were very young, our health was this collaborative experience where, medical professionals were saying like, talk to me about how it feels when you breathe. Talk to me about what your body feels like when you're nervous. Talk to me about what your belly does, to little children. And we started prioritizing inner metrics as much as we do outer metrics. Nothing wrong with outer metrics. I'm happy with microscopes and telescopes and stethoscopes and all of that. And we very heartily bias towards the outside world will tell you about you. And in dance, that is like ubiquitous. Um, Teachers are telling you about your body. Teachers are telling you, and look in the mirror and let the mirror tell you. And that whole interoceptive awareness, proprioceptive awareness, equilibrium, and then that deeper sensing, feeling, intuiting, somatic connection of who I am, what I want, how I feel to what I do gets bifurcated and stripped. And so it takes a lot of work for dancers to come back to trusting themselves as the main metric for like what's happening here. And choreographers too, I think, we get brought up in this system where other people, whether it's teachers or audiences or critics or funders, tell us about us. And there's something that gets so oppressed in our authenticity. And then that kind of vulnerability gets really scary because we self-doubt. And of course we do, because, if you've been told to depend on this for your information, and then suddenly I'm like, but I feel like it's different, but I can't prove it because nobody's ever really valued or given credibility to my metrics. So I don't really trust them.
Yeah, love that answer so much. And I think that no matter listeners, your creative channel, whatever you make, I think it's kind of a similar thing. When you're in the midst of creating, being with what you're making takes letting go of the outcome and really trusting your talent and letting go of the audience, which is funny because I think we all kind of do get that external validation because we're told that being a creative, to be a successful one, people have to like what you do, right? Quote unquote successful, I mean.
Yeah.
But I guess with performance, it's literally right in front of you because you have your audience is right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And for yourself, what was your journey to kind of arriving at that space? And it's a continuous life path, of course. We all come across moments where we slip into the external and then have to bring ourselves back. But what kind of kicked off your journey towards that feeling or that space?
Well, I have to say, I think I'm a little bit of an outlier because I had an unusual childhood, a fairly like cliche Gen X childhood where I kind of raised myself. I spent a lot of time alone when I was a kid, like fully alone in an apartment or fully alone roaming around Queens, New York. And so I do think that there was a real dearth of input. That like external input was not just kind of neutral, but like lacking. So I was making everything up myself. And because I was alone so much, I think I had this kind of resonant feeling because I would just echo off the walls, not off of other people who were feeding me back information about myself. That was part of it. I also didn't have a traditional body type for a dancer. So I was kind of never what I was quote unquote supposed to be. And I think it, in a way, helped me let go of, try to match this standard or try to meet this model or goal or aesthetic because I was never going to do that anyway. So I think, in a way, being an outlier in those two ways freed me to have a lot of inner sensing. And I don't know if it's because of that nature nurture, I don't know, but I've always had like a very sensitive nervous system. Like I've just always had a lot of interoceptive sensitivity, and I could always tell like which ovary was ovulating and which, like I just always knew what was happening in my body from when I was pretty young, I'd say teenager. So I think I'm an outlier. But I do think that there are actionable ways to move toward that if you have been conditioned by the outside world a lot. And I think the biggest tool you can use is slowing down.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think, although of course isolation is not really the best start to life, and not what we all kind of necessarily need at the time. However, it does turn you inward towards listening,
Yeah,
so you can kind of feel that. And then I think later in life, if you don't have that upbringing, or if you're trying to find that within yourself, it really does come from slowing down and listening in whatever way that you find that you access that easily. I mean, it's really easy for me to say like, oh, I'll sit and meditate. When I first started meditating 13 years ago, I could not sit still like that.
totally. Well, and like, our productivity culture, especially if you live more in a like Western country are like capitalism and productivity culture and like dissociation from nature and natural cycles and natural rhythms. Um, and then just this like go, 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 produce, make, be better than, achieve, compete, all of that. It just really drowns out our natural tempo. And often when I'm teaching a movement class and I'm trying to invite a certain kind of awareness of a kinetic chain, meaning how a couple body parts are listening to each other and affecting each other. Like if you move your ribs, like rotate your ribs, rotate your spine, like what is happening to your head? Is your head just kind of sticking to your spine because that's not actually the organic kinetic chain. Actually, your head would take a little delay or a little drift, right? And when I'm watching students and I can tell that they're not feeling the physics of their body, I'm always requesting that they slow down and really wait, no, hold on. Wait. And I can feel this like push in their body to like, I got to get there. I got to think. I got to learn it. I got to
Mm.
get to the end of it. I got to achieve it. And I'm like, whoa. Like we need to rehabilitate from the tempo of our culture, which is generally based on other people's expectations or standards or systems, and us trying to meet them. And we really exile parts of ourselves, and we start dragging parts of ourselves around the way you drag a toddler through the grocery store. And eventually there's a meltdown, or a real disconnection, and you have to repair. So, like before it gets to that, slowing down. And the way we would with that toddler before they start melting down, being like, what's going on? What's
Mm.
happening for you? You look like you need something. And if we could start treating parts of ourselves and our body in that way, and being like, hold on, I'm not just gonna, there has to be inner consent for everything we do. And we really start to deny ourselves that consensual relationship. And that means we're allowing something outside of ourselves to take precedence over all the parts of us.
Yeah, definitely. I can so see what you mean there about people kind of, it sounds weird, but dancing from the head. Because in yoga classes, I see that a lot as well. But more like now I live in Barcelona, people are a little bit slower. But when I was teaching in London, I'd always like make fun of people, like as a joke, just like you're practicing like a Londoner, like you got to be somewhere, you know, you got to catch the tube and go to the next meeting and you got to tick off the list and just do it. Um, so yeah, I totally know what you mean there. And actually, I do kind of a similar thing. Sometimes I then say practice this movement in slow motion, like as slow as
Yeah.
you possibly can. And then you start to feel parts of your body that you didn't even know were there. And
Totally.
drop into that sensation and be with what's actually happening in your body. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. And I can totally see that. I'd love to know, like, from the kind of upbringing that you came from, what was your introduction into dance? Before we continue, I want to pause and share something that I built for heart led creatives like you. Ember is the supportive space to ground, to regulate, to reset, and to grow. Inside, you'll learn how to work with your creative energy instead of against it, so you can move through blocks and deeply trust your voice. You can try Ember for free for 7 days. Just head to the link in the show notes to join us, and I cannot wait to see you inside. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I took a dance class at a summer camp when I was 8 years old. I thought at the time I wanted to be a painter. I definitely was like an artist at heart already. And it was this great day camp where you had a major and a minor, and your major you did 2 hours a day, and your minor you did 1 hour a day. So I was majoring in painting. And then I had to pick something. And my mother had been a dancer actually in her earlier life. And I was like, oh, I'll take a dance class. And I mean, it was one class. And I was like, oh, that's me. That's what I'm doing with my life. And I joke because people, adults in this, somewhat patronizing way, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd be like, oh, I'm already doing it. I used to say I'm already doing it like I was 9. Um, but it was true. I was already doing it. I did feel about dance as if I wasn't making any choices. And sometimes in my younger career, people would express some kind of admiration for me for like having stuck with dance, even though I wasn't really finding at that time some real acceptance and celebration because I had this less traditional body type. Um, and I used to feel a little fraudulent accepting their praise because I felt like I don't feel like I ever really chose to be a dancer. It just like it was there. I mean, it was happening and that was what was going to happen. And people are like, "Oh, you're so brave, to like fight the system." And I was like, "Really?" Because I didn't have any choice. It just felt like this is what I'm doing. I knew it from when I was a kid.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think that a lot of us can resonate with that feeling of like you do something because you can't not. It's like there's not really a question about it. It's just like you're creating because you can't not do that. That's just somehow in your makeup from whenever. Um, yeah, I can totally feel that. And then from the journey from there, what then started you, or like what brought you to think maybe what I'm meant to do was choreographing instead of being a pro? Or did you
Yeah,
were you a pro before?
I was having this lovely, beautiful career as a professional dancer. I was dancing with Bill T. Jones and touring the world, and it was fabulous. And then I noticed when we were in creative process, I had to keep biting my tongue because I would have an idea. And, as collaborative a choreographer as Bill was, it's his company, it's his piece. And I was like, oh, we should, no. Mm-mm. Oh, no, nope, 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 nope. I was like, okay, I need to go make my own work. So that was part of it. And to be honest, I also like just wasn't able to have a love relationship as a touring dancer because we are just constantly picking up and leaving for
Yeah.
6 weeks or 8 weeks at a time. And I was almost 30 and I was like, I like want partnership. I have things I need to learn in this life that I feel like I'm only going to learn in partnership. And so that also was a factor. But I definitely felt like I don't want to say just, being in my body and somebody else's work ceased to satisfy this voice that was starting to speak inside me, and I really felt like I had images and I had messages, um, and I had a different way that I wanted to work in the room too. Like every choreographer works in their own way, and Bill has his own beautiful method, and it doesn't actually, it turns out, like totally align with my creative process. Once I got a little older and found my process, I was like, oh yeah, I need very different things. And I didn't know that at the time in my 20s.
Yeah, I don't think many of us do. I can imagine being around someone like that for that long and being with someone else's work would have taught you a lot about the choreographer that you want to be, maybe in some ways the choreographer you don't want to be. Um, I would love that. Something just sparked a little question in my mind there of going back to what we were saying right at the beginning about the kind of external versus internal. What must be, and what I've witnessed in a lot of friends of mine that are actors or dancers or performers, is because you're constantly auditioning for somebody else's approval.
Mm.
How is that kind of dance of continuous, excuse the pun, of excuse me, continuously coming back to your inner authority when you could?
Yeah, well, I'm always a fan of finding where the resonance is. And when I say resonance, I don't mean that abstractly. I mean it in that physics way, like, what vibration is matching another vibration and finding cohesion or a certain kind of like empathy. And I often, when I'm talking to younger dancers, like college age dancers, and somebody may ask me about auditions, one of my biggest pieces of advice is to listen to the language that the director or choreographer is using in the audition. Are they prioritizing qualities, slinky, powerful, dynamic? Are they prioritizing rhythm, counts, musicality, spatial directions, relationships, sensations, etc.? And then get interested in that. Like find your genuine curiosity and alertness and awakeness and aliveness inside that container. So like, oh, they're really like counts, 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 counts. Okay. Can your like skeleton, can your weight shift, can your, bony body get like really excited about like then, right then, and the syncopation? And can you find your aliveness in the rhythm? And if they're all about space, can you like open up and get really excited about like directions and angles and dimensions and planes and diagonals and proximities and focus and facing? Can that be what you start to use to express yourself and find your voice? So I think a lot of times with outside work, it's about trying to find true resonance, not just meet their goal or fulfill their expectation. But I think this transcends certainly dance, but even art. I mean, I hope that people in business and corporations are, trying to do the same thing. Like, what's the goal of this? How do I care about it? How do I meet it from my authenticity? And, unfortunately, I think that's not as common in a lot of industries, but even in our industries, it's not all that common. And, I wish it were.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of industries, creative and not and otherwise, we slip into, well, I'm just going to do what I'm told instead of, it doesn't have to be, I'm just going to do my own thing. But especially if you're doing something that's a company and a team and
Yeah.
stuff like that, it's like, how do I kind of alchemize this through the lens of what feels right for me and what does not?
Yeah. And why, like, where do I care about this? And, if we're using that as a way to meet each other, it also is a litmus test or a signaler that, like, oh, I don't care about this. I don't align with this. This is not the right place for me or not the right industry for me, right? Because the things that you're saying don't spark any kind of curiosity or joy or excitement for me. So now I'm just doing it for you. And that's not a way to, you know, have a career, much less a life.
Yeah, definitely. Or definitely not one that you're ever going to feel very fulfilled
Yeah.
In that kind of transition for you, going from, the dancer to choreographer, what was that like to kind of come to the opposite end of the room?
Yeah. To be fair, I was dancing in my own work for a few years there until I think got my choreographic legs underneath me a little more and realized I could communicate. Not only that I felt more confident to be able to communicate my vision to somebody else through, movement and language, but I didn't need to be the one doing it. It's like only my body can understand what I'm trying to say. I got
Mm.
better at being able to invite people into the meaning that I felt in my body. And then also, as my work, I think, got more complex and nuanced, I had to step out and be able to see it, hear it, and make choices from the outside. So that is part of the transition. But inside I mean, I definitely spent the first few years, I don't have regret, but I do think of that whole 29, 30-year-old emerging choreographer with a lot of tenderness. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back and mentor you. In some ways, I think I wrote this book that I just wrote like for that young choreographer that I was like, oh, I wish somebody had told me these things back then. Um, I think that I had to do quite a bit of shedding, pruning of other people's methodologies and interests from my body and my mind and my strategies. I think I had to find my own movement vocabulary. So I feel like those first few years, I did a lot of like very specific, like choreography with a capital C, meaning like I'm making the moves and I'm teaching them to other people's bodies. Now, when I choreograph, like I rarely make movement anymore. I give prompts and assignments, and the dancers make material, and then I'm searching that material for like what is interesting. Oh, that with that, and that, but like this, and you teach that, and so I'm like more like a collage artist than I am. I don't know what the alternative would be. But so I think that like years of really concentrating on vocabulary was about me pruning, especially Bill's aesthetic from my choreographic process. And I love his work, but I didn't want to make his work. So I needed to figure out what my body wanted to make. I think I did that. I also was figuring out like what kind of leadership style I wanted to have, and that was also a pruning process. And I think also that leadership style changed a lot when I became a mother.
Yeah, I can imagine, definitely. At what point in that whole kind of journey or within that space did you start to dive into the somatics of
Mm.
everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like, when did I do it consciously, and where do I look back and see that it was happening? And I think because of what we started talking about, me having kind of raised myself in a lot of ways and been alone a lot, I had this strong sense of my feelings, my systems, my interoception, etc. So I think I
Mm.
always had that. When did I start focusing on it more directly? It came in like little bits and drabs throughout training and practice. You learn a little bit of Alexander technique or a little Feldenkrais or a little BMC, and then in 2014, I got my CMA, which is a certified movement analyst degree from the Laban Institute. And that is teaching you how to analyze the human body towards meaning. And as part of that program, you're learning Bartenieff fundamentals, and Irmgard Bartenieff was like an incredible contributor to somatic practice. And that really gave me infrastructure and language and scaffolding to be able to take all of these sensations and intuitions and ideas that I had in my body and be able to not just articulate them, but like look at another body and recognize certain things that were happening. And I just started getting into much more of that in group work. And then eventually that led to a private somatic practice where I get to work one-on-one with people. And that work has become much more emotional and interior, akin to dance movement therapy, though I don't have that degree, so I don't, call it that.
Yeah. And when you're working one on one, is it more with dancers or is it with anyone?
No, actually, I have very few dancers. I mean, I work one-on-one with dancers a lot on their choreographic process or mentorship and career thoughts. But the more somatic work actually has rarely been dancers, partly potentially because I think they can find their way into that maybe a little bit more easily, and they're also broke.
True.
So I think, no, it's like civilians.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, I think I can definitely see that happening and definitely see. I think I had a similar thing. I mean, I didn't have the upbringing that you had at all, but I can definitely I had the same thing of like being very intuitive, being very aware of the feelings of my emotions, and then when like somatic work started to kind of become slightly more popular, or when I saw articles about it and stuff, I was like, oh, this makes sense now. I make sense.
Yeah, I love that. I love when, we learn about some system that's like whatever, even ancient, and you're like, oh, yeah, oh, I didn't make that up. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I
just
felt
like
like that.
discover some whole new world of thing. You put your
Totally.
own
But
stamp on that world, I guess.
I love that though. Like I love, and I often teach in that way where even though I have content that's pretty specific that I'm, going to communicate to these students, I actually put them into a space where they're discovering it themselves. So, like for example, with this Laban movement analysis, there are these affinities between spatial directions and dynamic qualities. So, like impact lines up best on your vertical, and awareness of the environment lines up best on your horizontal. And a sense of time lines up best on your sagittal, which is your front to back. So, but instead of saying, so your vertical is weight and up is light. And I'm like, okay, so these are these three, we call them motion factors, weight, space, time. These are these three motion factors. And we've already learned these three dimensions. Where would you put, weight? And then they play with it and we talk about it. And sometimes they disagree with the system. And then that gives us a place to actually like have a great conversation so that rather than and this is my way to counter some of the things we were talking about in the beginning around like, I don't want to be the authority for you. I want to be a really adaptable, intuitive, awake sounding board. I want to help you find a map, make a blueprint of you, what your feelings, your thoughts, your vision, your intuition, your art, but I don't want to tell you things. Even when I've got content to teach, I don't want to just like give it to you. I want to create an environment in which in some ways you invent it and then we talk about it. And then I'm like, "Oh, you didn't invent it." But you did invent it. And I love that for students and I love that for myself. I think when I was younger and I would read about something that I had been doing for a while on my own, I would feel like, oh man, I didn't make that up. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, that's awesome. I tapped into something that's like a real thing. That's cool.
Yeah, definitely. I totally see that we think that it's cool when you think, oh, I've just invented this whole new thing. But then when you realize it's not a whole new thing, you're like, oh, like some kind of universal wisdom
Yeah.
just landed in me.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
cool is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to know now, because we're talking to you at this point where you're in the middle of writing two books at the same time, which is, as we mentioned before,
Crazy.
recording a lot. I would love to know how all of this kind of plays out in your creative process. Maybe that's not to do with dance, to do with other stuff that you create, or it could be with dance as well.
Meaning like all this meaning like somatics and
Yeah, or just your creative process in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I've discovered, and I do write about this in one of those books, is that I have a very deep love for both my intuitive, somatic, internal, instinctual side where I'm like, does anyone have an umbrella? I feel like she needs to hold an umbrella. Wait, okay, no, wait, let's do that. Let me see those two, like these things that happen in rehearsal, and you're like, that's crazy, but then it works or it doesn't,
Mm.
I love that side, but I also really love my analytical, logical, research it, put more pressure on it, be rigorous about it. No, it's still not there. Why is it not there? Let's break it down. What's happening? Look at the details. I love that logical side too. I don't think they play well together. And I think when often the brain tries to do both at once, and often that's when we talk about like being blocked or frozen. And I think part of that is like, you can be in this wild, intuitive, like, I don't know why, spontaneous, inventive side. And then the logical brain can start to poke in and say, wait, but where's this going? Wait, but where are you going to put this? Wait, but da, da, da. Oh, the time of the rehearsal is going by. And, it can often be an inner critic voice that comes in that logical way. Or I think, a lot of the voices that we're talking about from that outside world, like that are judging you or have an expectation about what artistic process looks like or what creation looks like, and you're not matching it. And it's not useful in that moment. You need somebody who's just cheerleading. You're like, yeah, that's crazy. What else? Where could that go? Classic improv, yes, and right. And the yes, and energy is what I need when I'm in that flow. And if I find myself interrupting with that logical brain, I try to gently say, I absolutely want to talk to you. I absolutely want to know what you have to say. Not now. I need this space right now, right? And then the same thing happens for me when I'm in my logical side, and my intuitive side is like, oh, but I love that. Oh, and it gets nostalgic or it gets attached or it gets sentimental. I don't want to cut it, or it looks so pretty, or we spent so long on it, or, sunk cost fallacy. And so when I'm being analytical, I am like a hard ass. I don't compromise, and I try not to. And this is definitely what I'm trying to manifest right now as I'm doing my final edit. I'm sitting in front of it. This is my last chance to touch these words before they get printed, and I can't touch them anymore, which for a live art person is a terrifying new place to be.
Mm.
This feeling of like posterity and like a three-dimensional thing that I can no longer change is horrifying to me. But I am being like so rigorous with myself where I'm like going really slowly. And I feel like, certain read throughs of my book, I'm like, I know I didn't skim it, but I didn't go slowly enough to be like, okay, if I knew nothing about this, I'm just discovering this sentence for the first time. Do I get that? No, I don't. And it takes slowing down for me to notice that in my body because I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. And I'm like reading it and I'm going and it's too fast. And when I slow down, which I'm really challenging myself on this final read through, be like, nope, hold on. Slow down, read that sentence again. You don't know anything about what you're talking about. Does it hit you right away, or do you have to kind of translate it in your mind? And if I have to translate it, I'm like, nope, not good enough. What's a different word? What's not happening? Where am I not connecting either to a thought or to the language or even the syntax that's really going to communicate this? And sometimes it's like the difference between a period and a semicolon that helps me be like, oh, it's because they needed to stop there for a second. That needed to land because this new thing is not as attached to that idea. And sometimes it's these tiny little details, but I'm really challenging myself to slow down enough to feel in my body when it's not right.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really important that you mentioned that because I think that having those two sides is really vital as a creator because we need that like intuitive and inspired and like flowy version of ourselves in order to like create something, but too much of that can create kind of
Chaos.
chaos or
Chaos.
just like going nowhere.
Yeah, and like a lack of rigor. And you're like, I don't know, I like it. And you're like, great, why? That's fine.
Yeah.
Great.
And
Why? Why do you
yeah.
like it? What do you like about it? Where does it cease making you feel like that? And, I think we can kind of gloss over, yeah, and like maybe that doesn't totally make sense, or maybe I haven't really defended that relationship. And I see this in dance a lot where these two people haven't really had any relationship, and then suddenly they're together doing this like really intimate duet, lifting and touching and partnering, and it's not like a movement for movement's sake piece. It's a piece that does have real human relationships we're supposed to recognize in some way. And I'm like, how are they suddenly so close? What happened? I don't understand. You didn't give me any kind of arc that I can recognize in my body from the audience. And ultimately, when we're an audience, we are animal bodies watching other animals, and we're looking for clues towards meaning. And meaning for animals is always about survival. So, like when we're talking of, we throw this word high stakes around in theater and dance a lot, raise the stakes. But it becomes this like placeholder. And what we're really talking about is like, how are you activating the bodies of the audience towards like an authentic experience? And often that is like a scientific neurological experience of like mirror neurons firing. You watch something, if it's recognizable enough from your human body, your body responds. And, so when we say like, oh, they were on the edge of their seats, or, they gasped or whatever, that is because their bodies were so engaged in what was happening in the bodies of the performers that they were in it with them to some degree. For me, that's always a goal. That doesn't mean that has to be every creator's goal. But for me, as a creator of live art, that's always the goal. I want the bodies of the audience to be invested, awake, engaged in it. And that means that we have to put pressure on this intuitive and, and say, yeah, that's not clear enough.
Mm. And I'm sure over time and over years, that kind of analytical side, because as you said, when you go too far into that, then we get the inner critic, then we get that like really harsh criticism and like nothing is ever working. Kind of, you have to learn how to kind of rein both in. But I think that they kind
Yeah.
of do that from each other. It's polarity, right? It's
If,
relationship
yeah,
within
I
yourself.
think, I think if you can feel it, and the other thing about the analytical is it just can become pretty bloodless, right? And it all works kind of on paper. But
Mm,
then you're like, yeah, but I don't feel anything. You're like, no, well, they did that because of this, and they did this, da, da, da. And this is yeah, but I don't feel it. Like,
mm.
and a lot of times that comes down to, I'm also a theater director, and a lot of times that comes down to like the body is not saying what we want the character to say because we haven't talked to this actor about their body. So, you're doing Macbeth, and the person playing Lady Macbeth has a kind of, droopier posture just naturally. And you haven't engaged her in the qualities of like verticality and bound flow and firmness that the character needs. You haven't brought it into her body. She might be doing it vocally, she might be doing it in terms of her focus, and she might be feeling it, but you're not feeling it when you watch her because the body hasn't really been invited into the communication at as deep a level.
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly too much of that analytics creates a lot of rigidity. And then to bring the conversation like kind of full circle from where we like began, it creates doing the stuff rather than feeling the stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we have kind of come full circle, it kind of feels like a good time to um, bring you toward the last two questions that I ask everybody, and I'm really interested to know what you're going to say. The first one is, what do you think is the most common misconception people have? It could be either about you or about the work that you do?
Mm. Oh, wow. That's a lovely question. Um, I think that I'm going to answer it about me, and I'm going to say that I mentioned a couple times that I have not lived in a kind of traditional dancer's body. And I think the biggest misconception that I have heard throughout my life, especially my dance life, is people assume my feelings about my body because I'm willing to put my body out in public and be visible. They immediately assume, like, you're confident, you love yourself, you're so happy with yourself, you're so self-accepting. And I'm like, where are you getting any of these things? I just do it anyway. I don't feel those things necessarily. Um, I think later in life I have started to feel some of them, but like for many years I was like, no, no. I I have to push through a lot of insecurity and self-loathing and all kinds of things because I need to dance. And I do feel I have something to say. And when I dance, I feel differently about myself, but I also know that I'm coming into a room where you may not feel differently about me and you may not feel those things about me. And I don't like that feeling. And people have made up so many things about how they think I feel about myself based on my actions. And I think that's a pretty common thing that we do with each other, right? We make up the backstory based on what a person's doing. And I think that's a real disservice to each other, and we don't ask nearly enough questions of each other.
Definitely. And I think that that tendency that we have for that comes from, because a lot of people would give in then. They'd say, like, no, I feel insecure in this thing. So I'm not going to do the thing that makes me feel the most myself. I'm not going to do the thing that I love because I don't feel like I belong there, instead of just doing it anyway, like you have, for sure. I think everyone's carrying a lot of stuff that nobody's ever going to see. We're not really going to know. And it's
Yeah.
important for everyone to be understanding of that.
Yeah.
Definitely. The second question is, if you think back, it could be through your life or through your career, to a really memorable conversation that you've had. Who were you with, and what did they say that has stuck with you?
Mm, wow. Ooh, that's quite a question. Hmm. Honestly, the first thing that comes up are a lot of the conversations that I've had with my kids.
Love that.
Um, I was walking in Union Square Park with my son Lucas when he was maybe 5 or 6 years old. And we were watching this artist do, I'm not sure what the name is, but like sand art where they've just like sprinkling sand on the ground in these pictures. There's no
Mm.
adhesive or anything like that, right? And we watched for a while. It was pretty mesmerizing. And then I said to my 5-year-old, isn't it amazing to watch somebody put so much effort into something that is, is going to get blown away at any moment? And my son was always a little Buddha, and he just looked up at me and he said, everything disappears eventually.
Whoa.
And even though we didn't necessarily have like a huge conversation about it afterwards, I feel like that moment has always stuck with me, um, in in feeling like this ability to both truly care and also find non-attachment in your creativity. And I feel like he really affected me in that moment, and it stuck with me.
Yeah, wow, I love that so much. Kids can, like, they channel some wisdom sometimes, so you never know where the hell that comes from, but
Yeah.
it's so true. That we do have to remain non-attached to the things that we create, and I think that being that way is part of this building a fulfilling creative path. If you're too attached to the things that you do and too precious about everything, Then again, it goes into that rigidity that we were just talking about, instead of just allowing it to kind of be birthed and let
Yeah.
go.
And then I think sometimes the flip side of it is like, well, I just won't care that much. And it's like, no, no, no. Care completely
Yeah.
and let it go completely. Because then you can have a relationship with it, right? Like the other way is basically enmeshment. So
Yeah.
if in human relationships, if you're like too enmeshed, you're not actually relating because you're not separate enough to be able to like have push pull and have your own weight and make choices and have consent about, like how close and how far. And I think we can be like that with our art too. It's like we're too wrapped up in it. The ego, identity, sense of self, value, et cetera, is too wrapped up in the art. We can't see it. Because if we say, oh, that's not working, then we're not working. So, like,
Yes.
we have to have that distance to be able to really affect our art and have a real relationship with it that's got some like push and pull. And then we also have to care about it deeply.
Yeah. And then have the ability to let it be its own thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Love that. That's such a beautiful answer. I love that so much. Alexandra, thank you so, so much for coming on the show. This has been such a pleasure to sit down and chat with you today. And thank you for being here with us during the time when you need to be doing your editing and last drafts for your book
Thank
and
you.
everything. Thank you so much for
Thank
giving
you. It
us the
was a
time.
pleasure.
Um, just for everyone listening, where is the best place that everybody can find you, your work, and books when they come out?
My website's a pretty great hub, alexandrabellerdances.org, and it's got a connection to the book website, and it's got some free classes and articles and essays and ways to contact me. So I think my website's probably just the best hub.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll definitely, of course, put all the links to find everything in the show notes. Thank you again so, so much for coming on. Everyone listening, do leave a comment or a review. It helps a lot. And if you had a part of this conversation that really resonated with you, then do let us know. You can share it with a friend or just share it with us on social media or however else you want to share. But otherwise, thank you again for coming on. Thank you again for listening. And I'll see you again next week. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Maverick Mind. I hope that you've loved it, and if you have, I would appreciate it so much if you would subscribe and write a 5-star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast from. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I invite you to join me over on Instagram at maverickmindco or on my website maverickmind.elliefoden.com. And I'll see you in another podcast very, very soon.